Mike Shepherd and his German Shepherd, Rex, were conducting their routine security patrol at JFK International Airport when the call came through that his 8-year-old daughter Emma had collapsed at school. By the time he reached the hospital, her battle with leukemia was over, while he had been searching strangers' suitcases for contraband. 3 years later, Mike still walked the same terminal with Rex, a shell of the man he once was, his wedding ring long removed, but the weight of absence never lighter. That Tuesday morning, Rex suddenly broke protocol and lunged toward an abandoned suitcase near Carousel 4, scratching frantically at its sides, and when Mike finally pried it open, what he discovered inside made his blood run cold. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. JFK International Airport stood as America's gateway to the world, a sprawling complex of terminals, runways, and security checkpoints where millions of travelers passed through each year. In the post-9/11 world, security wasn't just a priority, it was an obsession. Terminal 4 bustled with activity at all hours, a constant flow of humanity from every corner of the globe, each person carrying their own story, their own secrets. Mike Shepherd hadn't chosen airport security. It had chosen him after his honorable discharge from the Marines. At 42, his once military posture remained intact, though the creases around his blue eyes had deepened significantly over the past 3 years. His brown hair, now flecked with gray at the temples, was kept regulation short, and his uniform was always impeccable. Colleagues respected his dedication but kept their distance from the emotional fortress he'd built around himself. The loss of Emma had broken something fundamental inside Mike. One day, he'd been a family man with a beautiful daughter and a stable marriage. The next, he was standing at a small grave site while his wife Carolyn sobbed beside him. 6 months after the funeral, Carolyn had moved to Chicago, unable to bear the constant reminders of their daughter in every corner of New York. Mike had stayed, punishing himself with memories, taking extra shifts, and retreating further into his work with Rex. Rex was more than a working dog to Mike. The 7-year-old German Shepherd had been with him through everything: deployment in Afghanistan, the transition to civilian life, Emma's illness, and the aftermath of her death. Where Mike had grown colder, Rex seemed to have developed an almost uncanny sensitivity. The dog was exceptional at his job, with an unmatched record for detecting narcotics and spotting suspicious behavior. But he also seemed to understand human suffering in a way that unnerved some handlers. Director William Hayes had given Mike space after Emma's death, assigning him to the overnight shift where interactions were minimal. It was Hayes who had ensured Mike could keep working with Rex, despite protocols that typically rotated handlers. The dog won't work the same with anyone else. Hayes had argued to his superiors, though everyone understood it was Mike who couldn't bear another loss. Sarah Reynolds from the FBI's Wildlife Trafficking Division occasionally consulted at JFK, her path crossing with Mike's during joint operations. With her auburn hair typically pulled back in a practical ponytail and her face rarely showing makeup, Sarah focused on being taken seriously in a male-dominated field. Few knew of her childhood in foster care after surviving abuse, or how that had fueled her determination to protect the vulnerable, whether human or animal. Then there was Richard Blackwood, head of security operations for Terminal 4. Tall, silver-haired, and perpetually confident. Blackwood ran his domain with precision and authority. His office walls displayed commendations and photos with politicians and celebrities passing through his terminal. Everyone respected Blackwood. Mike had never questioned why. The late shift at JFK had always suited Mike. Fewer passengers meant fewer prying eyes, fewer chances for well-meaning colleagues to ask how he was doing. Tonight, the memories were particularly heavy. Emma would have turned 11 today. He'd started his shift with a silent promise to her, the same one he made every year since she'd been gone. "I'll make you proud today, sweetheart." Mike and Rex moved methodically through Terminal 4's international arrivals area. The cavernous space, usually teeming with reunions and tearful goodbyes, stood relatively quiet at 11:30 p.m. A few stragglers from delayed flights trudged toward ground transportation, but mostly it was cleaning crews and the occasional security patrol. "Come on, boy," Mike murmured as Rex began to drift from the usual patrol route. The shepherd's ears had perked up, his nose working overtime as he pulled toward a service corridor. Mike checked his watch. They were behind schedule, but Rex's behavior couldn't be ignored. Good handlers trusted their dog's instincts. "What do you got?" "Rex." Mike followed as the dog moved with increasing determination past the luggage carousels and toward a baggage staging area where unclaimed items were held. Rex's pace quickened, his body language shifting from curious to alert. The baggage room was dimly lit and cluttered with suitcases of various sizes, tagged and organized by arrival date and flight number. Mike scanned his ID badge at the door, following Rex as the dog moved purposefully through the maze of forgotten belongings. Rex stopped abruptly before a large black suitcase in the corner. It bore no airline tags, no identification labels, nothing to indicate its origin or owner. Mike frowned. An unmarked bag shouldn't be here. It should have been flagged immediately for special screening. "Easy, Rex." Mike approached cautiously. Unattended baggage was security threat number 1. Rex should have given his standard alert for potential explosive, sitting perfectly still and pointing his nose directly at the suspicious item. Instead, the shepherd whined and pawed at the suitcase, behaviors Mike had never seen in their years together. Mike reached for his radio. "Control. This is Officer Shepard in the Terminal 4 unclaimed baggage area. I've got an unmarked suitcase that needs explosive ordnance disposal assessment. Over." "Copy that, Shepard. Stay clear and establish a perimeter. EOD team notified. ETA 7 minutes. As Mike began cordoning off the area with security tape, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, a calendar reminder he'd set a year ago. Emma's birthday. Bring flowers. His throat tightened as he slipped the phone back into his pocket. "I'm doing my job, Em," he whispered. "Just like I promised." Rex continued his unusual behavior, circling the suitcase and emitting low whines. Mike kept him at the regulation distance while they waited for the bomb squad, but the dog's distress was palpable. Mike's mind drifted to the last birthday he'd spent with Emma. She'd been so weak from the chemotherapy, but insisted on wearing the tiger-striped party hat he'd bought. Emma had loved tigers, had a whole collection of stuffed ones lined up on her hospital bed. "They're fighters, Daddy," she'd told him. "Like me." The EOD team arrived in full protective gear, their movements methodical and practiced. Mike and Rex retreated to the required distance, watching as the technicians conducted their assessment using a portable X-ray scanner. "No explosive components detected," the team leader announced after several tense minutes. "No wiring, no power sources, no chemical signatures, monsieur. But there's something strange about the contents." Mike stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "Not sure. Organic matter. Some movement detected. Could be a biosecurity issue." Mike approached the suitcase again, this time noticing what he'd missed before: small air holes drilled into the hard shell, barely visible in the dim light. "There's ventilation holes," he said, pointing them out to the EOD team leader. "Good catch. This isn't a bomb. It could be smuggled animals or plants. We should call Department of Agriculture." But Rex's distress was increasing, his whines growing more urgent. Years of working with the shepherd had taught Mike to read these signs. Whatever was in that suitcase was suffering. "We need to open it now," Mike decided, overriding protocol. "Something's alive in there." The EOD leader hesitated, then nodded. They carefully examined the locks, no booby traps detected, and positioned themselves to open the case with minimal risk. Mike held his breath as the latches were released. The heavy lid lifted to reveal a nightmare 3 tiger cubs, no more than a few weeks old, lay huddled together on a bed of soiled newspaper. Their orange and black striped bodies were skeletal, ribs protruding sharply against dull, matted fur. Their eyes, barely open, were crusted with discharge. "Jesus Christ," breathed the EOD leader. Mike felt the world tilt beneath him. The smallest cub, white with faint black stripes, reminded him painfully of the stuffed tiger Emma had clutched throughout her treatments. His chest constricted as he knelt beside the suitcase. The cubs were barely moving, their breathing shallow and labored. "Get veterinary services here now," Mike ordered, his voice breaking. "And find me a heating pad, clean towels, and some Pedialyte from the first aid station." "Shepherd, we need to follow protocol," came a stern voice from behind. Mike turned to see Richard Blackwood striding toward them, his expression darkening as he spotted the suitcase contents. "This is evidence in a wildlife trafficking case. We secure it and wait for Fish and Wildlife." Mike stood his ground. "With all due respect, sir, these animals will be dead by then. They need immediate care." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "That's not our problem. Our job is to secure the area and preserve the chain of evidence. Step back." "Shepherd." Rex positioned himself between Mike and the suitcase, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Mike had never seen his partner challenge authority before. "Sir," Mike said carefully, "these cubs are evidence too. Dead evidence doesn't help anyone. I've completed EOD protocols, and I'm making a judgment call for emergency animal welfare intervention." Blackwood stared at Mike, then at the pitiful cubs. Something unreadable flickered across his face. "Fine, 15 minutes for emergency measures, then everything goes by the book. I'll make the calls." He turned and walked briskly away, already pulling out his phone. Mike didn't waste a second. He directed the EOD team to help him stabilize the cubs, gently cleaning their eyes and warming their cold bodies. As he cradled the smallest white cub, memories of holding Emma through fever nights washed over him. The cub felt as fragile as she had near the end. "Hang on," he whispered, unsure whether he was speaking to the cub or to Emma's memory. "Just hang on. I've got you now." The veterinary team arrived with impressive speed, rushing into the baggage area with cases of equipment and urgent expressions. Their leader, a petite woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, took control immediately. "I'm Dr. Linda Parker from the Wildlife Conservation Society," she announced, kneeling beside the suitcase without hesitation. "We partner with Port Authority for exotic animal emergencies." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency over each cub, checking vital signs and murmuring observations to her assistant. "Severe dehydration, malnourishment, hypothermia," she reported. "The white cub is in critical condition. We need to start fluids immediately. Mike stood back, watching as IV lines were placed into the tiny paws. The smallest white cub barely reacted to the needle, a bad sign. He knew from Emma's hospital days, too weak to even feel pain. Officer Shepard. A woman's voice pulled his attention away. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Reynolds, FBI Wildlife Trafficking Task Force." Mike turned to see a woman in her mid-30s with auburn hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her FBI windbreaker was thrown over a simple button-down and slacks, suggesting she'd been called from home. "You're the one who found them?" she asked, her eyes moving to the medical activity surrounding the cubs. "My partner did." Mike nodded toward Rex, who sat attentively nearby, still watching the cubs. "He alerted to the suitcase, but not in the usual way. It was like he knew what was inside." Sarah knelt to briefly acknowledge Rex with a gentle hand on his head. "Good boy," she said softly, before standing to address Mike again. "What you've found is bigger than you know. Those aren't just any tigers." She gestured toward the cubs, particularly the white one. "Sumatran tigers. Critically endangered, fewer than 400 left in the wild. And that white cub, she's even rarer. A genetic mutation that occurs in maybe 1 in 10,000 tigers." "What's their value?" Mike asked, already dreading the answer. "The orange cubs, about $50,000 each on the black market. The white one." Sarah's expression hardened. "Up to $500,000 to the right collector. There are people who want rare animals like trophies, status symbols." Mike's jaw tightened. "Who would do this, stuff them in a suitcase like luggage?" "Sophisticated networks," Sarah explained, pulling out a tablet and bringing up security footage. "We need to check cameras. See who left this suitcase here. This isn't amateur work." They huddled over the tablet, reviewing footage from the past 48 hours. "There," Mike pointed at the screen. "That employee, moving through secondary baggage claim, 2:14 a.m. He's not following standard handling procedures." Sarah zoomed in. "Good catch. He's deliberately placing it in a camera blind spot, but didn't count on that reflection." She frowned. "I'll need to run facial recognition, but this suggests inside involvement." Dr. Parker approached them, wiping her hands on a surgical towel. "We've stabilized them for transport. They need round-the-clock care at our facility." "How are their chances?" Mike asked, his voice betraying his concern. "The 2 larger cubs have about a 70% chance with proper care." "The white female?" Dr. Parker sighed. "Maybe 30%. Next 24 hours will be critical." Mike nodded, a familiar heaviness settling in his chest. The odds were too similar to what the doctors had given Emma in her final weeks. "I'd like to see them to your facility," he heard himself saying. "My shift ends in an hour, and I want to make sure they're secure." Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't object. "Actually, that could be helpful. I'd like to ask you more questions about the discovery anyway." As the veterinary team prepared the cubs for transport, Mike noticed something unusual about the suitcase interior. "Wait," he said, running his fingers along the lining. "There's something embedded here." Carefully, he pried up the fabric to reveal a small black device. Sarah leaned in. "That's a tracking device. Advanced model?" Her eyes met Mike's. "This shipment was meant to be followed to its destination. Someone's waiting for these cubs." "So, what do?" Mike asked. "We monitor the tracker," Sarah said decisively. "See who comes looking for it. These cubs aren't just victims. They're evidence that could lead us to the trafficking network. The conversation was interrupted by the return of Richard Blackwood, now accompanied by Director Hayes. "Officer Shepard," Hayes began, his tone carefully neutral. "I understand you've had quite the evening. Agent Reynolds has briefed me on the situation's importance." Blackwood cut in, his voice sharper. "Protocol dictates immediate handover to federal authorities. The cubs should be taken as evidence and—" "With all due respect," Sarah interrupted, "these animals require specialized medical care that standard evidence facilities can't provide. The Wildlife Conservation Society is our designated partner for such cases. Furthermore," she continued, "leaving the tracking device active gives us our best chance to identify the recipients. I'm formally requesting Port Authority's cooperation in a controlled delivery operation." Hayes looked between them, then nodded. "Agent Reynolds has jurisdiction here. We'll provide whatever support the FBI needs." Blackwood's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Of course. I simply want to ensure everything is handled by the book." His eyes lingered on the suitcase. "These trafficking cases can get complicated." As Blackwood walked away, Mike felt an inexplicable chill. Something in the security chief's reaction seemed off, too controlled. "I don't trust him," Mike murmured to Sarah once Blackwood was out of earshot. "Trust your instincts," she replied quietly. "After 10 years in this unit, I've learned that wildlife trafficking usually involves people you'd least suspect." The veterinary team was ready to move the cubs. As they carefully transferred the animals to temperature-controlled carriers, Mike found himself standing over the white cub's transport container. Her tiny body looked even smaller, surrounded by medical equipment. "Can I—" He hesitated, then continued. "My daughter had a stuffed white tiger, her favorite toy. Do you mind if I—" Dr. Parker's expression softened. "Of course." She stepped aside, allowing Mike to approach. Mike knelt beside the carrier. "Hey there, little fighter," he whispered. The cub's eyes, blue, unlike her orange siblings, flickered open briefly. Something in that momentary connection sent Mike back 3 years to Emma's hospital room, the same fighting spirit in those eyes. "We're calling her Hope," Dr. Parker said quietly. It seemed appropriate. Mike nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Sarah approached with her tablet. "Mike, I've been reviewing shipping manifests. This suitcase came in on a flight from Bangkok, but originated in Jakarta. What's interesting is that there have been 6 similar unmarked transfers in the past month, all disappearing from the system after arrival." Mike stood, professional focus returning. "Someone's clearing them through customs without inspection." "Exactly. And look at this." She showed him documentation where the same employee ID had signed off on each unusual shipment. "We need to find this person." "I can help with that," Mike said. "I know the airport systems, the staff rotations." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "This isn't just about the cubs for you, is it?" Mike looked back at the white cub at Hope being loaded carefully into the transport vehicle. "No," he admitted. "It's about doing what's right. Something my daughter would have wanted." "Then let's do this properly," Sarah said. "Are you willing to take some personal time? This investigation could get complicated." Mike didn't hesitate. "I have 3 years of unused vacation time. Director Hayes won't object. He's been trying to get me to take time off anyway." As they walked toward the exit, Mike felt Rex press against his leg, the shepherd's silent way of offering support. "One more thing," Sarah said, stopping at the door. "The tracking device is already active. Someone knows these cubs have arrived." "They'll be making their move soon." Mike checked his watch, 3:26 a.m. "Then we don't have much time." The Wildlife Conservation Society's treatment facility in Queens was a stark contrast to the sterile airport environment. Housed in a converted warehouse, it combined state-of-the-art veterinary equipment with the earthy smells of hay, feed, and the various animals under care. Mike sat on a metal folding chair in the observation area, watching through a glass partition as Dr. Parker and her team worked on the tigers. Rex lay at his feet, unusually subdued. The shepherd had refused to leave Mike's side since they'd discovered the cubs, as if sensing his handler's emotional connection to the situation. "Their body temperature is stabilizing," Dr. Parker announced, emerging from the treatment room. She pulled her surgical mask down and ran a hand through her disheveled gray hair. "The two larger cubs are responding well to fluids and nutrients." "And hope?" Mike asked, the name still feeling strange on his tongue. Dr. Parker's expression grew guarded. "She's fighting, but her condition is precarious. Severe dehydration has affected her kidney function, and we're seeing signs of respiratory distress." She paused. "The next 24 hours will be critical." Mike nodded, the familiar terminology bringing unwanted memories. How many times had he heard doctors say those exact words about Emma? How many critical 24-hour periods had he endured? Only to face another, and another. "Can I see her?" he asked. "Doctor." Parker hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly, we're limiting exposure to reduce stress and infection risk." Mike followed her into the treatment room, the antiseptic smell hitting him like a physical force. The cubs lay in separate incubators, surrounded by monitoring equipment that beeped and flickered with vital signs. The two orange cubs were curled together in one unit, their breathing more regular now, occasionally twitching in sleep. Hope occupied the smallest incubator. IV lines ran into her tiny front paw, and an oxygen mask had been fitted over her muzzle. Her white fur, now cleaned of the grime from the suitcase, seemed to glow under the treatment lights, the black stripes barely visible like watermarks. "She's so small," Mike murmured. "About 4 weeks old." Dr. Parker confirmed. "They should be with their mother at this age. The trauma of separation alone causes immense stress, even without the transportation conditions." Mike placed his palm against the clear side of the incubator. "You're doing great." "Hope," he whispered. "Just keep fighting?" Sarah Reynolds found him there 20 minutes later, still watching the white cub's shallow breathing. She carried 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Mike wordlessly. "Any change?" she asked after he'd taken a sip. "Holding steady? That's something." He turned to face her. "Any progress on tracking the airport employee?" Sarah nodded, pulling out her tablet. "Jason Mercer, 28 baggage handler at JFK for the past 3 years. No criminal record. Lives in a modest apartment in Queens. Nothing that explains sudden deposits totaling $35,000 in his account over the past 6 months. What about the tracking device? Still active, but no one's attempted to access its location yet. We have a team monitoring it round the clock." She swiped to another screen. "I've also been looking into historical shipping data. The pattern suggests monthly deliveries, always routed through different originating airports but arriving at JFK within the same 72-hour window. Mike frowned. So, whoever's running this has established a regular supply chain. Exactly. And based on the variety of species we've identified from import records, they're supplying a substantial client base. She hesitated. There's something else. I've been cross-referencing the delivery dates with staff schedules. Richard Blackwood was on duty for every single shipment. Mike's jaw tightened. That can't be coincidence. No, Sarah agreed. But Blackwood is well connected. Former military. Friends in federal law enforcement. Political contacts. We need concrete evidence before making any moves against him. Mike glanced back at Hope, her tiny chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Those cubs are the evidence. They were shipped like cargo for someone's collection or entertainment. Sarah nodded grimly. And they're just the ones that got caught. For every animal we intercept, dozens more die in transit. A notification chimed on Sarah's tablet. She checked it, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. The tracking device is being accessed. Someone's checking the location. Mike straightened. Can you trace it? Yes, but they're using proxies. Wait, she tapped rapidly on the screen. The signal's originating from inside JFK, Terminal 4. Mike's eyes narrowed. Blackwood's office is in Terminal 4. We need surveillance on him, but discreetly. If he's involved and realizes we suspect him, he could destroy evidence or warn others. Sarah ran a hand through her hair. I can request an undercover team, but bureaucracy will slow us down. I have a better idea, Mike said. I know that terminal like the back of my hand, and Blackwood is used to seeing me around. Rex and I can keep an eye on him without raising suspicion. Sarah considered this. It's not protocol. Nothing about this case has followed protocol, Mike countered. And right now, speed matters more than procedure. After a moment, Sarah nodded. All right, but you report everything directly to me, and no confrontations without backup. She handed him a small device. This will let you communicate securely with our team. Mike clipped it to his belt. I'll head back to the airport for my regular shift. If Blackwood's involved, he'll be trying to figure out what happened to his shipment. Be careful, Mike, Sarah warned. People in wildlife trafficking are involved in a multi-billion-dollar industry. They don't take kindly to interference. Mike nodded, then knelt to check on Rex. Ready for work, buddy? The shepherd responded with an alert posture, sensing his handler's renewed focus. Before leaving, Mike stopped for one more look at Hope. Keep fighting, he whispered. I'll be back soon. The drive back to JFK gave Mike time to think. The image of the cubs stuffed into that suitcase kept overlapping with memories of Emma in her hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her small body to machines. Both innocent, both suffering due to human greed and indifference. Emma had loved tigers. Her room had been decorated with tiger posters, tiger bed sheets, tiger everything. In her final weeks, when the pain had been at its worst, she'd clutch her stuffed white tiger and tell herself, strong like tiger, strong like tiger. Over and over. Mike gripped the steering wheel tighter. He couldn't save Emma. But maybe he could save these cubs, especially Hope. Maybe that could mean something in the vast emptiness her death had left behind. JFK's employee entrance was quiet as Mike badged in for his scheduled shift. Rex trotted beside him, drawing the usual nods of acknowledgement from security staff. Nothing in Mike's demeanor suggested this was anything but a routine day. "Hey, Shepard," called one of the TSA supervisors. "Heard you had some excitement last night. Tigers." "Huh." Mike shrugged. "Just doing my job. Rex did the hard part." "Still, that's something. Blackwood was asking about you earlier." Mike kept his expression neutral. "Oh, what did he want?" "Just asking if you were coming in today." "Seemed pretty interested in your schedule." "Probably wants my report on the incident," Mike said casually. "I'll check in with him." As he walked away, Mike pressed the communication device Sarah had given him. "Reynolds Blackwood's been asking about my schedule. He's definitely interested." Sarah's voice came through clearly. "Copy that. We've set up surveillance on his office and his home. Proceed with your normal routine, but keep your eyes open." Mike continued his patrol with Rex, deliberately working his way toward Terminal 4's administrative section where Blackwood's office was located. As they rounded a corner near the Security Operations Center, Rex suddenly tensed, his ears forward. Following the shepherd's gaze, Mike spotted Blackwood in an animated conversation with a well-dressed man he didn't recognize. They stood in a secluded corner of the hallway, partially hidden behind a large potted plant. Mike tugged gently on Rex's leash, pulling them both back around the corner. He adjusted his position to hear better without being seen. "Becoming a problem," the stranger was saying, his voice low but intense. "First, the Bangkok shipment disappears, and now this. The client is extremely unhappy." "It's being handled," Blackwood responded. "The dogs weren't supposed to check that section last night. It was a scheduling error. An expensive error. That white cub alone was worth $500,000. Mr. Crawford doesn't tolerate such mistakes. Tell Crawford his merchandise will be recovered. I have people working on it right now." The stranger sighed. "See that it is. The upcoming shipment is even more valuable. We can't afford another mishap." Mike heard footsteps approaching and quickly pretended to be adjusting Rex's harness. Blackwood and the stranger rounded the corner, stopping short when they saw Mike. "Officer Shepard," Blackwood said, his surprise quickly masked with a professional smile. "I was hoping to catch you today. I need your incident report from last night." Mike straightened, nodding politely. "Of course, sir. I was just heading to complete it." Blackwood gestured to his companion. "This is Thomas Walsh, from the Port Authority Oversight Committee. He's conducting a routine review of our security protocols." Walsh, if that was his real name, offered a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Officer Shepard, I understand you and your K-9 made quite the discovery last night." "Just doing our job, sir," Mike replied, meeting the man's gaze steadily. Rex stood at attention beside him, emanating alertness. "Impressive animal," Walsh remarked, studying Rex with calculated interest. "German Shepherd, correct? How long have you been working with him?" 7 years. Best partner I've ever had." Walsh nodded. "Well, I won't keep you from your duties. Richard, we'll continue our discussion later." With a final assessing look at Mike, he walked away. Blackwood's expression remained pleasant, but Mike noticed a tightness around his eyes. "Those cubs you found quite the situation. I hear the FBI has taken over the case." "Yes, sir. Agent Reynolds from Wildlife Trafficking." Blackwood seemed to consider something. "Between us, Shepard, these cases rarely amount to much. The higher-ups make the right noises about conservation, but nobody really cares about a few exotic animals. You'll find your efforts are better spent on threats that matter." The dismissive tone made Mike's jaw clench, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "I'll keep that in mind, sir." "Good man. Have that report on my desk by end of shift." Blackwood clapped him on the shoulder and walked away. Once Blackwood was out of sight, Mike contacted Sarah again. "Did you get all that?" "Every word," she confirmed. "Walsh is not from Port Authority. We're running facial recognition now. And Crawford gives us a name to investigate." "They're planning another shipment," Mike added. "Sounds like it's happening soon. I'll alert our intelligence team. In the meantime, see if you can access the surveillance archives without raising suspicion. We need footage of previous deliveries." Mike made his way to the Security Operations Center, where his regular duties gave him legitimate access to certain systems. Using the pretense of completing his incident report, he began searching through archived footage from previous months, focusing on the dates Sarah had identified as suspicious shipments. The work was tedious and had to be interspersed with his regular patrols to avoid arousing suspicion. By mid-shift, his eyes were burning from staring at screens, but he'd isolated several clips showing the same pattern: unmarked luggage being diverted from normal processing, always during quieter periods, always handled by one of a small group of employees during his break. Mike drove to a nearby diner where Sarah was waiting in a corner booth. He slid a flash drive across the table to her. "Footage from 6 separate incidents," he said quietly. "Always the same method, same handling team. And Blackwood personally signs off on each shift roster, putting these specific employees together." Sarah pocketed the drive. "Good work. We've identified Walsh. His real name is Victor Crane, known associate of several wildlife trafficking networks in Southeast Asia. And Crawford is Tyler Crawford, CEO of Crawford Holdings and major donor to conservation charities." "Conservation charities?" Mike repeated incredulously. "Perfect cover." "His foundation sponsors captive breeding programs around the world, legitimate on paper, but we've suspected for years they're fronts for exotic animal trading. So they're planning another shipment. How do we catch them in the act?" Sarah leaned forward. "We need to be careful. Crawford has friends in high places, politicians, judges, even some law enforcement. If we move too soon without ironclad evidence, the whole case could fall apart." Mike's phone chimed with a text message. He checked it, his expression darkening. "It's Dr. Parker. Hope's condition is deteriorating. Her oxygen levels are dropping." He stood abruptly. "I need to go." "I'll drive," Sarah offered, recognizing the distress in his face. 20 minutes later, they rushed into the treatment facility. Dr. Parker met them in the hallway, her surgical mask pulled down to reveal a grim expression. "Her respiratory system is failing," she explained, leading them to the treatment room. "We've increased oxygen support, but she's struggling. The stress and conditions of transport likely caused pneumonia, and her immune system is too weak to fight it." Hope lay in her incubator, her tiny body now connected to even more equipment. Her breathing was visibly labored, each breath a clear struggle. The white fur around her muzzle was damp with medication and condensation from the oxygen mask. "What can you do?" Mike asked, his voice hollow. "We're trying everything: antibiotics, assisted breathing, round-the-clock monitoring, but honestly, it might not be enough." Dr. Parker's professional composure cracked slightly. "I'm sorry. I know you've become attached to her." Mike pressed his palm against the incubator glass. "She reminds me of my daughter," he admitted quietly. "Emma had a white tiger plush she kept with her through her cancer treatments. Said it made her brave." Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder but remained silent, respecting the moment. Emma fought so hard. Mike continued, his eyes fixed on Hope's struggling form. Every day, every treatment, every setback. She never gave up, even when the odds were impossible. Children have remarkable resilience, Dr. Parker said softly. So do tiger cubs. It's not over yet. Mike nodded, watching Hope's chest rise and fall with each labored breath. The familiar feeling of helplessness washed over him, the same crushing weight he'd felt sitting beside Emma's hospital bed, watching her fight a battle he couldn't help her win. His phone vibrated. A message from the security team at JFK: unusual activity in Terminal 4 baggage processing. Blackwood authorizing after-hours access to Storage Area B. Mike showed the message to Sarah. "That's where we found the cubs." Sarah's expression hardened. "They're cleaning up evidence. We need to move." Mike looked back at Hope, torn between staying and going. "Go," Dr. Parker urged. "We'll do everything possible for her. If you can stop these people, you'll be saving countless other animals from the same fate." Mike nodded, drawing strength from her words. He leaned close to Hope's incubator. "Keep fighting, little one," he whispered. "I'm going to make this right, for you and for Emma." As they rushed back to the car, Sarah updated her team on the developing situation. "We'll need backup, but discreet. If Blackwood suspects we're on to him, he'll warn Crawford, and we'll lose our chance at the larger network." Mike buckled Rex into the special K9 harness in the back seat. "There's a service entrance on the east side of Terminal 4. Security coverage is minimal, and it leads directly to the baggage areas. We can observe without being detected." Sarah nodded, accelerating onto the highway. "Let's finish this. For Hope." Mike stared out the window, the darkening sky reflecting his determination. The emptiness that had been his constant companion since Emma's death felt different now, not gone, but transformed into something purposeful. He thought of the white cub fighting for breath, of Emma's brave smile through pain, of the countless other animals suffering for human greed. For Hope, he agreed, and for Emma. The Eastern Service entrance to Terminal 4 was bathed in the blue-gray light of dusk when Mike and Sarah arrived. Mike guided them through a series of maintenance corridors, his years of working security providing intimate knowledge of the airport's hidden geography. Rex moved silently beside them, his training allowing him to maintain absolute quiet despite his alertness. "Night shift changes happen at 8:00 p.m., Mike whispered as they approached the baggage handling area. "Minimal staff for the next 20 minutes during handover procedures." Sarah nodded, checking her sidearm discreetly. She'd called in 4 undercover agents as backup, but had positioned them at key exit points rather than bringing them along. Too many people would increase their chances of detection. "Our goal is surveillance only," she reminded Mike. "We document what they're doing and who's involved. No confrontation unless absolutely necessary." Mike understood this strategy, but the memory of Hope fighting for breath made his hands clench involuntarily. He forced himself to focus, guiding them to an elevated observation platform that overlooked the baggage sorting area. From this vantage point, partially concealed by equipment, they could see the entire storage section where the cubs had been found. Below them, Richard Blackwood stood with Jason Mercer, the baggage handler Sarah had identified, and 2 other men Mike didn't recognize. They were gathered around a computer terminal, examining what appeared to be shipping manifests. "Are you sure it's coming tonight?" one of the men asked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Flight CX-419 from Hong Kong, arriving at 9:35, Blackwood confirmed. "The merchandise is listed as zoological specimens with all the proper documentation. Once it clears customs, you'll intercept and reroute to the private hangar." Mike exchanged a glance with Sarah. They were planning to divert another wildlife shipment tonight. "What about the missing cubs?" Mercer asked nervously. "Crawford's been calling me nonstop." Blackwood's face hardened. "That's being handled. We've identified the K-9 unit responsible. Once tonight's shipment is secure, we'll deal with that loose end." Mike felt a chill at the casual way Blackwood referenced him as a loose end. Sarah touched his arm in silent warning, reminding him to stay focused. "They've brought the special transport for the Komodo dragon," the taller man said. "Crawford's had the habitat ready for months." "A Komodo dragon?" Sarah breathed, her expression showing both shock and disgust. "Those are protected by international law, highly dangerous and require specialized care." Mike nodded grimly. The pieces were falling into place, a sophisticated operation smuggling exotic animals for wealthy collectors, with Blackwood using his position to ensure security protocols were circumvented. Sarah carefully documented the conversation with a small recording device, while Mike took photos using a specialized camera that worked in low-light conditions. They needed to gather enough evidence to bring down not just these individuals, but the entire network. The group below dispersed, with Blackwood instructing the others to prepare for the incoming flight. As they moved toward the international arrivals area, Mike and Sarah carefully made their way down from their observation point. "We need to alert customs about the incoming shipment," Sarah whispered. "I have contacts who can delay the processing while we position our team." Mike nodded, but Rex suddenly tensed beside him, ears forward and body rigid with attention. Following the shepherd's gaze, Mike spotted a figure moving through the shadows on the far side of the baggage area, someone who hadn't been part of the group with Blackwood. "Someone else is here," he murmured to Sarah. "Rex is picking up on something." Sarah drew her weapon. Could be security. Could be another part of their operation. Mike unclipped Rex's leash and gave him a hand signal to advance cautiously. The shepherd moved forward with practiced stealth, using the cover of baggage carts and equipment. Mike and Sarah followed at a distance, staying in the shadows. Rex stopped near a stack of crates, his posture indicating he'd identified the source of his concern. Mike approached carefully, peering around the corner to see a man working on a large animal transport crate, the special transport they'd mentioned for the Komodo dragon. The man was installing what looked like remote monitoring equipment inside the crate. Mike signaled to Sarah that they should withdraw and observe. As they backed away, Mike accidentally brushed against a wheeled cart, causing it to shift with a slight metallic squeak. The man's head snapped up. "Who's there?" he called, reaching inside his jacket. Mike signaled Rex to hold position, but it was too late to retreat unseen. He stepped forward, adopting the confident posture of someone who belonged there. "Airport security," he announced calmly. "This area is restricted after hours." The man relaxed slightly but remained wary. "I have authorization," he said, pulling out an ID card. "Wildlife transport preparation for the incoming zoological specimens." Mike approached as if to examine the ID, maintaining a professional demeanor while taking in details about both the man and the transport crate. The crate was substantial, at least 8 feet long, with reinforced sides and specialized ventilation. far more sophisticated than the crude suitcase that had held the tiger cubs. "I don't recognize this equipment," Mike commented, nodding toward the devices the man had been installing. "Environmental monitoring," the man explained. "Temperature, humidity, oxygen levels, valuable specimens require careful handling." "Of course," Mike nodded. "Carry on." "I'll note your authorization in my report." He turned as if to leave, catching Sarah's eye from where she remained concealed. But as he took a step away, the man's phone rang. He answered it, listening briefly before his expression changed. "Yes, he's here right now," the man said into the phone, his eyes hardening as he looked at Mike. "K9 unit, the one from last night." Mike knew instantly that his cover was blown. The man reached inside his jacket again, this time pulling out a handgun. Mike reacted instantly. "Rex, take him," the shepherd launched from his position, a blur of motion that caught the armed man by surprise. Before he could aim, Rex had clamped onto his arm, the force and shock causing him to drop the weapon and cry out in pain. Sarah emerged from concealment, weapon trained on the man. "Federal agent on the ground, now." The man sank to his knees, clutching his arm where Rex maintained his grip. "Call off your dog," he gasped. "Rex, hold," Mike commanded, keeping the shepherd in position while he secured the dropped weapon. Sarah quickly handcuffed the man, then spoke urgently into her communication device, alerting her team. "Suspect in custody. Operation compromised. All units move in on primary targets." "They know we're here," Mike warned. "Blackwood will be warned any second." As if on cue, alarms began to sound throughout the baggage area, not the standard fire or security alarms, but an internal alert system used to warn of customs inspections or security breaches. Blackwood was mobilizing his people. "We need to secure the incoming shipment," Sarah insisted. "That Komodo dragon is evidence that connects Crawford directly to illegal wildlife trafficking." "The flight lands in less than an hour," Mike noted. "They'll be expecting resistance now." Sarah made a quick decision. "I'll coordinate with my team to intercept at customs. You follow Blackwood. He's likely heading to alert Crawford or destroy evidence." Mike nodded, giving Rex the command to track. The shepherd immediately began following the scent trail Blackwood had left behind, leading them through a series of service corridors toward the administrative offices. They emerged into a quieter section of the terminal, where executive offices overlooked the main concourse. Rex paused outside a door marked Head of Security Operations, his posture indicating their quarry was inside. Mike could hear Blackwood's voice through the door, sounding urgent and stressed. "Everything's compromised. The FBI is involved?" "Yes. She's here with that K9 officer from last night. I understand the shipment's value, but we need to abort." Mike exchanged glances with Sarah, who had caught up with them. They needed to act before Blackwood could destroy evidence or warn others. Sarah nodded, positioning herself beside the door. "Federal agent," she announced, pushing the door open with her weapon ready. "Hands where I can see them." Blackwood stood behind his desk, phone in one hand, the other hovering near a drawer. His face registered shock, then calculation. "Agent Reynolds," he said smoothly. "This is a misunderstanding. I was just about to call your office about suspicious activity I've uncovered." "Save it, Blackwood," Sarah replied coldly. "We have you on recording discussing the illegal shipment. Step away from the desk." Blackwood's expression hardened. With surprising speed for a man his age, He grabbed something from the open drawer and lunged toward a side door. "Rex, stop him," Mike commanded. The shepherd shot forward, but Blackwood slammed the side door, temporarily blocking their pursuit. By the time Mike forced it open, Blackwood was sprinting down an emergency stairwell. "He's heading for the tarmac," Mike realized. "The private hangars." They pursued down the stairs, Rex leading the way with focused determination. The stairwell exited onto the tarmac level, where service vehicles and fuel trucks moved between aircraft. In the distance, a line of private hangars glowed against the night sky. Blackwood had a substantial head start, but Rex followed his scent unerringly. As they ran across the open tarmac, Mike spotted their quarry climbing into a waiting golf cart. The vehicle took off toward the private hangars. "He's going to destroy evidence and warn Crawford," Mike called to Sarah as they ran. "We'll never catch him on foot." Sarah spotted a security patrol cart parked nearby and ran toward it. "Airport security emergency situation," she shouted to the startled officer, flashing her FBI credentials. The officer quickly yielded the vehicle. They jumped in, Rex sitting alertly between them as Sarah accelerated after Blackwood. The distance between them began to close. Blackwood glanced back, seeing their pursuit. He swerved suddenly toward a hangar with its lights on and doors partially open. As he approached, the doors began to open wider. "That's Crawford's hangar," Sarah said, recognizing the private jet visible inside with the Crawford Holdings logo. Their escape route. They pulled up outside just as Blackwood disappeared inside. Sarah called for backup, but they couldn't wait. "Stay behind me," she instructed Mike, drawing her weapon again. "Crawford is dangerous and likely armed." They entered the hangar cautiously, Rex walking slightly ahead, his training in detecting both threats and contraband making him the perfect point man. The space was filled with the sleek private jet, several luxury vehicles, and against the far wall, a series of large transport containers similar to the one they'd seen being prepared in the baggage area. Blackwood stood near the containers, speaking urgently with a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit. Several armed security personnel flanked them. "Tyler Crawford," Sarah identified the man quietly. "Billionaire, philanthropist, wildlife criminal." Crawford noticed their entrance immediately. Unlike Blackwood, who radiated panic, Crawford maintained an air of complete control. "Agent Reynolds," he called across the hangar, his voice cultured and confident. "This is a private facility. You're trespassing without a warrant." Sarah advanced steadily, her weapon held ready, but not directly aimed. "Tyler Crawford. I'm investigating the illegal importation of endangered species, including Sumatran tiger cubs and a Komodo dragon. Richard Blackwood is under arrest for his role in this operation." Crawford smiled thinly. "Serious accusations. My foundation works closely with legitimate conservation programs worldwide. Any animals in my possession are properly documented and legally acquired for breeding programs." "Save the performance," Sarah replied. "We have recordings of your operation, documentation of illegal shipments, and 3 rescued tiger cubs as evidence." At the mention of the cubs, Crawford's composure flickered briefly. He glanced at Blackwood, who looked increasingly desperate. "The white cub," Crawford said, addressing Mike directly. "A magnificent specimen, one of a kind. Such a waste in a government facility when it could be thriving in my private conservation program." "She has a name," Mike said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Hope. And she's fighting for her life because of how your people transported her." The Crawford shrugged. "Regrettable, but replaceable. Nature produces rarities continuously if you know where to look." He turned to one of his security men. "Show our guests what real conservation looks like." The man moved to one of the large containers and opened a viewing panel. Inside, a massive Komodo dragon lay sedated on a bed of synthetic material, its powerful body rising and falling with shallow breaths. "The last pure bloodline from Flores Island," Crawford announced proudly. "Soon to join my private collection, the largest assembly of rare species in the Western Hemisphere." "You're not a conservationist," Mike said, disgust evident in his voice. "You're a collector. These animals aren't trophies." Crawford's expression hardened. "They're whatever I say they are. Do you have any idea who I am? The connections I have, senators, judges, agency directors, all guests at my fundraisers, beneficiaries of my donations." He smiled coldly. "This little investigation will disappear with one phone call." Sarah stood her ground. "Not this time. Crawford, we've documented everything, distributed the evidence to multiple agencies. Even your connections can't make this disappear." Crawford's facade of civility slipped, revealing the predator beneath. "Then perhaps we need a more permanent solution to our problem." He nodded to his security team, who drew their weapons. The standoff was interrupted by the sound of sirens and vehicle engines outside. Sarah's backup was arriving. Crawford assessed the situation rapidly. "It seems we'll have to continue this discussion another time." He turned toward his jet, signaling his pilot to start the engines. "You're not going anywhere," Sarah stated firmly. "The airport is locked down," Crawford laughed. "Private airstrip, private flight plan, already filed and approved this morning. Unless you plan to shoot down my jet, Agent Reynolds. You can't stop me from leaving." "Maybe not," Mike said, stepping forward with Rex at his side. "But we can stop that." He pointed to the container with the Komodo dragon. "That animal isn't leaving the country." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "You care too much about animals. Officer Shepard, I've read your file. Tragic about your daughter, Emma. Wasn't it leukemia's a terrible way to go?" The casual mention of Emma's name and death hit Mike like a physical blow. Crawford knew who he was, had researched his personal tragedy. The implication was clear. Crawford's reach extended everywhere, into personal records, into private grief. "You don't say her name," Mike said quietly, a dangerous edge to his voice. Crawford smiled, seeing the impact of his words. "Stand aside and let us leave with our property, and I'll ensure your career continues unimpeded. Interfere, and I'll destroy whatever remains of your life." The momentary distraction was all Blackwood needed. He lunged toward a control panel on the wall, hitting an emergency button that began to close the massive hangar doors, potentially trapping Sarah's backup outside. "Rex, take him," Mike commanded. The Shepherd bolted across the hangar with astonishing speed, knocking Blackwood away from the controls and pinning him to the ground. The security team raised their weapons, but Sarah already had Crawford covered with her sidearm. "Federal agent weapons down," she ordered. "Outside." Vehicles screeched to a halt as FBI and airport police swarmed the narrowing opening of the hangar doors. In the chaos, Crawford made a desperate move toward one of the transport containers, pulling a concealed handgun from his jacket. "Stay back," he shouted, aiming the weapon not at the agents, but at the sedated Komodo dragon. "Let me leave, or I destroy the very evidence you're so eager to protect." The standoff froze everyone in place. Crawford, his back to the container, kept his weapon trained on the helpless animal. His security team, seeing federal agents flooding into the hangar, wisely lowered their weapons. "It's over, Crawford," Sarah said calmly. "Even if you leave now, there's nowhere you can go that we won't find you. The evidence is too substantial." Crawford's eyes darted around like a cornered animal. "I've built this collection for 20 years, some of the rarest creatures on Earth, preserved under my protection. You think government facilities can care for them better? They'll die in your bureaucratic prison." "This isn't about conservation," Mike said, slowly moving closer with Rex at his side. "It's about possession, about owning what no one else can have." Crawford's hand trembled slightly. "You don't understand what drives men like me. The pursuit of the unique, the irreplaceable." "I understand perfectly," Mike replied. "My daughter was unique, irreplaceable, and I couldn't save her." He took another step forward. "But I can save them." Rex, sensing his handler's intent, tensed in preparation. "Last chance, Crawford," Sarah warned. "Surrender now." Crawford's face contorted with rage and frustration. He swung his weapon toward Mike. "Rex, now," Mike commanded. The shepherd launched forward in a blur of fur and precision, knocking the weapon from Crawford's hand before he could fire and pinning him against the container. Crawford cried out as powerful jaws clamped onto his arm, immobilizing him completely. Federal agents swarmed in, securing Crawford and his team. Sarah holstered her weapon and approached Mike, who stood watching as Crawford was handcuffed and led away, still protesting his innocence and threatening legal consequences. "We did it," she said quietly. Mike nodded, but his expression remained somber. "We got him. But what about Hope? And all the other animals they've trafficked?" Sarah squeezed his shoulder gently. "One battle at a time. Mike, this is a major win. Crawford's network is global. His arrest will disrupt wildlife trafficking operations across 3 continents. Mike knelt to praise Rex, who had performed flawlessly throughout the operation. As he rubbed the shepherd's ears, his phone vibrated in his pocket. The caller ID showed the Wildlife Conservation Society. His heart pounding, Mike answered. "This is Shepherd. Dr. Parker's voice came through, sounding exhausted, but was it possible hopeful? "Mike, there's been a change in Hope's condition. You need to come as soon as you can." Mike looked at Sarah, fear and anticipation warring in his expression. "Hope the white cub, something's happened." Sarah nodded in understanding. "Go. We've got this covered here. I'll debrief you tomorrow." Without hesitation, Mike ran for the exit, Rex at his heels, praying he wasn't too late for the little fighter who had somehow become his second chance. The fluorescent lights of the veterinary facility cast harsh shadows across the treatment room as Mike rushed in, Rex following closely behind. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat echoing Emma's name. The drive had been a blur. Red lights run, speed limits ignored. The only thought in his mind that he needed to be there, needed to witness whatever had happened to Hope. Parker met him at the entrance to the intensive care area, her surgical mask hanging loose around her neck, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes. The expression on her face was unreadable. "What happened?" Mike asked, breathless from his sprint from the parking lot. "Is she—" "Her condition deteriorated rapidly after you left," Dr. Parker explained, leading him toward the incubators. "Her oxygen levels crashed, and we had to intubate, put in a breathing tube." Mike's stomach clenched as they approached Hope's incubator. The tiny white cub was now barely visible beneath the additional medical equipment. A ventilator pumped rhythmically, forcing air into lungs too weak to function on their own. Monitoring equipment beeped and flashed with concerning numbers. "She's in multi-system failure," Dr. Parker continued. Her professional tone softened with genuine regret. "Kidney function severely compromised, respiratory system overwhelmed by infection, and signs of neurological issues from prolonged oxygen deprivation." Mike placed his palm against the clear plastic of the incubator, a gesture that had become familiar over the past day. Hope looked even smaller now, her white fur dull under the medical lights, black stripes barely visible like fading ink on paper. "What are her chances?" he asked, the question painfully familiar one he'd asked about Emma countless times during her final weeks. Dr. Parker sighed. "Honestly, less than 10%. And even if she survives, there may be permanent damage. We're doing everything medically possible. But..." She didn't need to finish. Mike understood the unspoken reality. He'd heard it before, in another hospital, from other doctors with the same compassionate but resigned expressions. "Can I stay with her?" he asked quietly. Dr. Parker nodded. "Of course. Sometimes. Sometimes I think they can sense when someone cares. It might help." She left Mike alone with Hope, Rex sitting attentively at his feet. The shepherd seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, his usual energy subdued into watchful concern. Mike pulled a chair close to the incubator and sat heavily, the events of the past 24 hours crashing down upon him. They'd caught Blackwood and Crawford, dismantled a major wildlife trafficking operation, and rescued numerous endangered animals, a victory by any professional standard. So why did it feel so hollow as he watched Hope fight for each breath? "Hey there, little fighter," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I got the bad guys, just like I promised." The ventilator continued its rhythmic whooshing, the only response to his words. "Your brothers are doing better," he continued, nodding toward the adjacent incubator where the two orange cubs were sleeping peacefully, their conditions steadily improving. "They're going to be okay. You need to catch up with them." Rex whined softly, resting his muzzle on Mike's knee. The gesture of comfort was so similar to how the shepherd had supported him through Emma's illness that Mike felt his throat tighten painfully. "You know," he said to Hope, "you remind me of my daughter, Emma. She fought so hard, too." He pulled out his wallet and removed a small, worn photo Emma in her hospital bed, grinning despite the tubes and monitors, clutching her stuffed white tiger. "See? She loved tigers, said they were the strongest animals in the world." The cub remained motionless, except for the artificial rise and fall of her chest from the ventilator. "She had the same kind of spirit I see in you, determination, even when the doctors said..." His voice cracked. "Even when they told us there was nothing more they could do, she kept fighting, right until the end." Mike hadn't spoken about Emma this openly since her funeral. The words felt strange in his mouth, rusty from disuse. But once started, they seemed to pour out of him. "I was supposed to take her to the zoo that weekend to see the tigers. Had it all planned, special behind-the-scenes tour where she could see the tiger cubs. But then I got called in for that anti-terrorism training. Thought it could wait until I got back." He closed his eyes briefly. "She never woke up again." Rex pressed closer against his leg, offering silent support. "I keep thinking, If I'd just been there. If I'd taken her to see those tigers like I promised. He shook his head. Caroline, my ex-wife, she said I was punishing myself, that Emma's death wasn't my fault. But it feels like it was. Like I failed her. Hope's vital signs fluctuated on the monitor, a brief spike followed by a concerning dip. One of the alarms chimed softly, then settled back into its regular pattern. Dr. Parker returned with a technician, quickly checking the readouts and adjusting medication levels. Her kidneys are struggling to process the antibiotics, she explained. We're trying to find a balance between fighting the infection and not overwhelming her system. Is there anything else you can try? Mike asked, the desperation in his voice all too familiar. Dr. Parker hesitated. There's an experimental treatment protocol being used for critically ill exotic cats at San Diego Zoo. It's aggressive and risky, especially for one so young, but it might be her only chance. Do it, Mike said without hesitation. You should understand the risks, she cautioned. It could tax her system beyond its limits. She might not survive the treatment itself. But without it, she definitely won't make it, right? Dr. Parker nodded reluctantly. Given her current trajectory, no, I don't believe she will. Then we have nothing to lose, Mike said firmly. She deserves every chance. The veterinary team moved into action, preparing the specialized medications and equipment needed for the procedure. Mike was asked to step outside temporarily, finding himself in the hallway with Rex, feeling the same helpless anticipation he'd experienced during Emma's most intensive treatments. Sarah Reynolds found him there an hour later, pacing the corridor while Rex watched attentively. "Mike," she said softly, "I came as soon as I could. Any news?" He shook his head. "They're trying something experimental. It's been—" he checked his watch. 74 minutes. Sarah nodded, understanding his precise timekeeping, the counting of minutes that might be a life's last. "Crawford is in federal custody," she told him. "No bail. We found documentation of over 30 illegal wildlife shipments at his estate, including detailed records of buyers across 3 continents. The investigation is expanding by the hour." Under normal circumstances, this would have been cause for professional satisfaction. Now, Mike just nodded absently. "And the Komodo dragon," he asked, "being transferred to a specialized facility at the Bronx Zoo. Their experts say he'll recover fully. We also found 6 more tiger cubs at Crawford's property, all from the same litter as your 3. "That's good," Mike murmured, his attention drawn back to the treatment room door as it opened. Dr. Parker emerged, removing her surgical cap, her expression grave. "We've administered the treatment protocol and stabilized her for now, but—" She hesitated. "Her heart stopped during the procedure. We were able to resuscitate her, but she was without oxygen for nearly 2 minutes. Mike felt the world tilt beneath him. "What does that mean?" "Brain damage is a significant concern, and her systems are so compromised. I've done everything medically possible. But I have to be honest with you, I don't expect her to make it through the night." The words hit Mike with physical force, driving the air from his lungs. He'd heard similar pronouncements about Emma, had thought himself prepared for this moment, but the pain felt just as raw, just as overwhelming. "Can I see her?" he managed to ask. Dr. Parker nodded. "Of course. Talk to her. Be with her. Just Prepare yourself. Mike returned to Hope's side, finding the tiny cub connected to even more machines, her fragile body almost lost among the tubes and wires. Her condition had visibly deteriorated for dull, breathing shallow despite the ventilator, the monitor showing weakening vital signs. Rex followed him in, settling beside the chair as Mike resumed his vigil. Sarah stood respectfully at a distance, witnessing Mike's grief but not intruding upon it. "I'm sorry." "Hope," Mike whispered, pressing his hand against the incubator. "I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner." The monitor's steady beep slowed, the gaps between heartbeats growing longer. "Doctor," Parker stepped forward, checking readings and adjusting settings, but her expression told Mike what he already knew: medicine had reached its limits. The parallels to Emma's final night were unbearable. The same machines, the same declining numbers, the same helplessness as he watched a life slip away despite every effort to save it. "It's okay," he found himself saying. The words he'd whispered to Emma when she'd looked at him with frightened eyes as her body failed. "It's okay to rest now. You fought so hard, so brave." Hope's heartbeat weakened further, the spaces between beeps stretching into small eternities. Mike felt tears tracking down his cheeks unheeded. Another failure, another loss. The emptiness inside him expanding to consume whatever healing had begun. "Time of death," Dr. Parker began softly, her hand moving toward the clipboard. Rex suddenly stood, ears forward, moving closer to the incubator. He whined, not a sound of distress, but the alert whine he used when detecting something important. The shepherd pressed his nose to the incubator glass, tail straight out behind him. "Doctor," Parker paused, frowning. "What is he?" The monitor beeped. Then again more quickly. Hope's tiny paw twitched, almost imperceptibly. "That's impossible." Dr. Parker breathed, rushing to check the readings. She's responding." Mike leaned forward, hardly daring to hope. "What's happening?" "I don't know," the veterinarian admitted, checking vital signs with growing astonishment. "Her heart rate is stabilizing, oxygen levels improving. It's like she's rallying." Rex remained alert by the incubator, his behavior confirming what the machines were reporting. Something had changed. Hope's eyes, which had been closed since they'd found her, flickered, then opened briefly. Brilliant blue, just visible through slitted lids, before closing again. "She's fighting?" Mike whispered. Fresh tears falling, but different tears now, born of fragile hope rather than despair. "She's still fighting." "Still." Dawn painted the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds as Mike stepped outside the wildlife treatment facility for the first time in 18 hours. The cool morning air felt sharp in his lungs, a reminder that the world continued its rotation despite the life and death drama unfolding inside. Rex padded quietly at his side, the shepherd seeming to understand his handler needed a moment's respite. Hope had survived the night barely. After that inexplicable rally that Dr. Parker was still struggling to explain scientifically, the tiny white cub had stabilized at a level just above critical, not improving substantially, but not declining further, hanging on with the tenacity that had inspired her name. Mike's phone vibrated in his pocket. Sarah Reynolds' name flashed on the screen. "Shepherd," he answered, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Mike, turn on the news," Sarah said without preamble. "Any channel." Frowning, Mike returned inside and made his way to the small break room where a television hung in the corner. He switched it on, finding a major network's morning show already in progress. One of the largest wildlife trafficking operations ever uncovered on American soil, the anchor was saying. Billionaire philanthropist Tyler Crawford, known for his contributions to conservation charities, was arrested last night in connection with the smuggling ring. The screen showed footage of Crawford being led in handcuffs from his private hangar, followed by shots of the exotic animals recovered from his property, including the Komodo dragon. Sources say the investigation began when airport security discovered 3 critically endangered tiger cubs stuffed into a suitcase at JFK International Airport. The report continued. One of the cubs, a rare white tiger, remains in critical condition. Mike stared at the screen in disbelief as his own blurry image appeared, security footage from the airport showing him and Rex discovering the suitcase. According to wildlife experts, this case highlights the growing crisis of exotic animal trafficking, now estimated to be a $20 billion industry worldwide, third only to drugs and weapons smuggling. "It's everywhere," Sarah said through the phone. "All major networks, social media, international press. Crawford's arrest is causing shockwaves through political and financial circles." "How did they get this footage so quickly?" Mike asked. "We didn't release it," Sarah replied. "But some anonymous source did. The story broke about 3 hours ago and has been gaining momentum ever since." The report continued, showing images of Crawford's extensive private menagerie, dozens of endangered species kept in admittedly luxurious but ultimately inappropriate enclosures. The camera lingered on cages containing additional tiger cubs, including several with the same distinctive markings as the ones Mike had rescued. "DNA testing has confirmed these tigers are siblings of the cubs found at JFK," the reporter explained. "Experts believe they are part of a critically endangered Sumatran tiger subspecies, with fewer than 400 remaining in the wild." Mike sank into a chair, watching as the story unfolded. The report detailed Crawford's network, his political connections, and the charity foundations that had served as fronts for his illegal activities. Several prominent politicians were already distancing themselves from the disgraced billionaire, claiming no knowledge of his criminal enterprises. "This isn't just about the trafficking," Sarah explained. "When we executed search warrants on Crawford's properties, we found financial records suggesting bribes to customs officials, wildlife inspectors, even judges. The corruption angle has every investigative journalist in the country digging deeper." "What about Blackwood?" Mike asked. "Singing like a canary to reduce his sentence. He's implicated at least a dozen other airport employees and provided details on previous shipments. The airport authority is conducting a full internal investigation." As Mike watched, the report shifted to focus on the rescued animals, particularly the tiger cubs. A wildlife expert was explaining the trauma the animals had endured and their prospects for recovery. The smallest cub, a rare white tiger now nicknamed Hope by her rescuers, remains in critical condition, the expert said. White tigers occur naturally in approximately 1 in every 10,000 births and are not a separate subspecies, but rather express a recessive gene that affects pigmentation. The station displayed a carefully selected image of Hope in her incubator, looking tiny and vulnerable amongst the medical equipment. "Who gave them that photo?" Mike demanded. "Not us," Sarah assured him. "The Wildlife Conservation Society must have released it. The public response has been overwhelming. Their donation page crashed from too much traffic, and they've had to set up a special fund just for Hope's medical care." Mike's mind reeled from the sudden publicity. What had been a relatively contained investigation had exploded into national news overnight. His phone buzzed with another incoming call, Director Hayes from the airport authority. Mike excused himself from Sarah and switched over. "Shepard," he answered. "Mike," Hayes began, sounding both impressed and concerned. "Have you seen the news?" "I'm watching it now, sir." "The Port Authority's been flooded with media requests for interviews with you and Rex. The commissioner wants to arrange a press conference this afternoon." Mike frowned. "With all due respect, sir, I'm not leaving Hope. She's still critical." Hayes sighed. "I understand, but this has become bigger than any of us anticipated. The public is captivated by this story, the dedicated K-9 officer who uncovered a billionaire's smuggling operation and is now keeping vigil over an endangered tiger cub. It's resonating with people. I'm not interested in publicity, sir. I know that, Mike. But this case is shining a spotlight on wildlife trafficking in a way nothing else has before. The FBI and wildlife conservation groups are calling it a watershed moment for public awareness." Hayes paused. "Think about it. You don't have to decide right now." After ending the call, Mike returned to Hope's intensive care room, where Dr. Parker was checking vitals and adjusting medications. "Any change?" he asked. "Small improvements in kidney function," she reported. "And her oxygen requirements have decreased slightly. Still critical, but moving in the right direction." She glanced at him. "I saw the news. Hope's become quite the celebrity." Mike nodded toward a vase of flowers that hadn't been there when he'd stepped out. "I'm guessing those aren't the last we'll see." "The first of many," Dr. Parker confirmed. "We've received calls from around the world, offers of specialized equipment, expert consultations, donations. Our director had to assign staff just to handle the inquiries." Mike settled back into his chair beside Hope's incubator, Rex resuming his now familiar position at his feet. The shepherd had become a fixture in the treatment room, his calming presence seemingly appreciated by both the medical staff and the cubs themselves. Dr. Parker checked her clipboard. "We've also received a rather unusual call from the San Diego Zoo. They've offered to fly in their leading expert on tiger neonatal care, Dr. Abigail Chen. She pioneered the treatment protocol we used last night." "That sounds helpful," Mike said. "It is. She's also bringing specialized equipment that could significantly improve Hope's chances." Dr. Parker smiled slightly. "Apparently, the zoo's director is an old friend of someone high up in the FBI who made a very persuasive case for assisting us." Mike suspected Sarah's influence behind this development, but said nothing. His attention was drawn to Hope, who seemed to be stirring slightly, her tiny paws making subtle movements. "Is she in pain?" he asked. "We're managing that carefully," Dr. Parker assured him. "Those movements are actually a good sign increasing neurological activity. After the cardiac arrest, we were concerned about brain damage, but those responses suggest her central nervous system is functioning." Hope's blue eyes opened briefly, seeming to look directly at Mike before closing again. The moment was brief but intense, a connection that sent a jolt through him. "She saw me," he said quietly. Dr. Parker nodded. "They're more aware than we sometimes give them credit for. I believe she recognizes your voice and presence." Throughout the morning, updates continued to arrive about the expanding investigation. Sarah texted that search warrants were being executed at properties connected to Crawford's associates across 3 states. International law enforcement agencies were pursuing leads on the overseas suppliers. The case was growing by the hour. Shortly before noon, Mike's phone rang again, a number he didn't recognize. Officer Shepard, this is Thomas Grayson from the Wildlife Conservation Federation. I wanted to personally thank you for your actions in uncovering this trafficking operation. Mike listened as the man explained that their organization had been tracking Crawford's suspicious activities for years, but had never been able to gather sufficient evidence for prosecution. The documentation seized from his properties has already helped us identify 3 other major collectors with similar illegal menageries. Grayson continued. This case may be the breakthrough we've needed to dismantle multiple trafficking networks. After Grayson, there were calls from wildlife protection agencies, conservation groups, and even the office of a prominent senator known for environmental advocacy. All expressed gratitude and offered support for both the investigation and Hope's recovery. Mike handled each call with polite brevity, uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing the importance of maintaining these connections for the benefit of the investigation and the animals' welfare. In the early afternoon, there was a different sort of interruption. A soft knock on the treatment room door. Sarah entered, accompanied by a man Mike didn't recognize. "Mike, this is Richard Blackwood's son, Kevin," she explained. "He has something he wanted to share with you." Kevin Blackwood was in his early 30s, with his father's height but none of his arrogance. He looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting his weight and avoiding direct eye contact. "Officer Shepard," he began hesitantly. I wanted to apologize for my father's actions, and to give you this." He held out a thumb drive. "My father kept records of everything." Kevin explained. "Insurance, he called it. When I heard about his arrest, I searched his home office and found this hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer." He swallowed hard. "It contains detailed logs of all wildlife shipments through JFK for the past 5 years, including contacts, payment records, and the names of everyone involved in the network." Sarah accepted the drive, her expression professional but clearly pleased by this unexpected development. "Your father never mentioned this during interrogation," she noted. Kevin shook his head. "He wouldn't. It was his leverage protection against Crawford ever turning on him." He looked at Hope in her incubator. "When I saw the news this morning, saw what they did to those animals, I couldn't stay silent. My father taught me to respect the law, even while he was breaking it." After Kevin left, Sarah plugged the drive into her secure laptop. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the files. "This is extraordinary," she said quietly. Blackwood documented everything meticulously: names, dates, shipment contents, bribes paid, and the names involved. She looked up at Mike. Cabinet members, federal judges, celebrities, foreign diplomats. Crawford was supplying exotic animals to some of the most powerful people in the country. "That explains the attempted cover-up," Mike said. Sarah nodded grimly. "And why my superiors initially tried to limit the investigation's scope. This goes beyond wildlife trafficking. It's systemic corruption at the highest levels," as they discussed the implications. "Dr." Parker burst into the room, her usually calm demeanor visibly excited. "Her latest blood work shows significant improvement," she announced, holding up a chart. "Kidney function normalizing, white blood cell count responding to the antibiotics, and oxygen saturation up to 92%. "What does that mean?" Mike asked, hardly daring to hope. "It means, Doctor," Parker said with the first genuine smile he'd seen on her face, "that Hope is living up to her name. If this trend continues, we could remove the ventilator tomorrow and see if she can breathe on her own." Mike looked from the doctor to the tiny white cub, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in his chest, something he hadn't experienced since before Emma's diagnosis. It took him a moment to recognize it as Hope, the emotion that had given the little tiger her name. "She's going to make it," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of determination. Dr. Parker's smile softened. "She's certainly fighting with everything she has. And now she has the world fighting alongside her." Rex whined softly and pressed his nose against the incubator glass, as if offering his own encouragement to the tiny fighter inside. In that moment, surrounded by the beeping monitors and the sterile medical equipment, Mike felt something shift within him, a crack in the wall of grief he'd built around his heart since Emma's death. Hope was going to survive, and somehow that meant he might survive too. 6 months had passed since that fateful night at JFK International Airport. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan buzzed with activity as journalists, wildlife advocates, and curious citizens packed the hallways, all waiting for the conclusion of United States v. Tyler Crawford. After weeks of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury had reached a verdict in what the media had dubbed the Tiger Trafficking Trial. Mike sat in the front row of the gallery, his dress uniform pressed and spotless. Sarah Reynolds sat beside him, her professional FBI attire a stark contrast to the casual clothes she'd worn during their investigation. Rex, unusually permitted in the courtroom due to his role in the case, lay at Mike's feet, a model of canine discipline despite the crowded space. The courtroom fell silent as Tyler Crawford was led in by U.S. Marshals. The once imposing billionaire appeared diminished in his prison jumpsuit, his imperious demeanor replaced by grim resignation. The evidence against him had been overwhelming thousands of pages of documentation, testimony from multiple accomplices including Richard Blackwood, and the physical evidence of the trafficked animals themselves. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a veteran federal judge known for her no-nonsense approach, called the court to order. "Will the defendant please rise for the verdict?" Crawford stood with his defense team, his expression carefully neutral as the jury foreman rose. "On the charge of conspiracy to violate the Endangered Species Act, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." "On the charge of smuggling wildlife in violation of the Lacey Act, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." The litany continued through 18 federal counts. Each met with the same response: guilty. By the time the foreman finished, Crawford's composed facade had cracked, revealing the anger beneath. Judge Harmon thanked the jury for their service before turning her attention to Crawford. "The defendant will return for sentencing in 2 weeks. Given the severity and scope of these crimes, this court will be considering the maximum penalties available." Her gavel fell with finality. Court is adjourned. As Crawford was led away, he locked eyes briefly with Mike. There was no remorse in that gaze, only cold hatred. Mike met it steadily, refusing to look away until the marshals escorted Crawford through the side door. Outside the courthouse, a sea of reporters awaited. Sarah skillfully guided Mike through the crowd toward a podium where the U.A. attorney was preparing to make a statement. Today's verdict represents a watershed moment in the fight against wildlife trafficking, the prosecutor announced to the assembled cameras. For too long, wealthy collectors have treated endangered species as trophies to be acquired at any cost. The conviction of Tyler Crawford sends a clear message that no one, regardless of wealth or position, is above the law. Mike stood at a respectful distance as various officials took turns making statements. The case had expanded far beyond Crawford, resulting in investigations across multiple countries, the arrest of dozens of smugglers, and the rescue of hundreds of illegally trafficked animals. When his turn at the microphone came, Mike kept his comments brief. "I'm just one part of a large team that worked to bring justice in this case. The real heroes are the animals who survived unimaginable cruelty, and the dedicated professionals who continue to care for them." He nodded to the assembled press. "Thank you." He declined further questions, uncomfortable with the public attention that had become a constant since the case broke. Though the media had dubbed him a hero, Mike still saw himself as simply doing his job, the job Emma would have wanted him to do. Sarah joined him as they walked toward her car. "You know," she said with a smile, "for someone who doesn't like public speaking, you've gotten pretty good at it." Mike shrugged. "Necessary evil. The wildlife advocacy groups say public awareness is up over 200% since the case started." "Speaking of which," Sarah said, checking her watch, "we should hurry if we want to make it to the sanctuary by noon. They're expecting us for the release." The drive from Manhattan to the newly established Big Cat Recovery Sanctuary in rural New Jersey took just over an hour. What had once been a private horse farm had been transformed with the help of donations that poured in following the Crawford case. Now it housed dozens of rescued exotic cats, providing them with specialized care and naturalistic habitats. As they pulled through the gates, Mike spotted Dr. Tone Parker's car already in the parking area. The veterinarian had become a regular presence in his life over the past months, her dedication to the tiger's recovery matching his own. Dr. Parker greeted them warmly at the visitor center. "Perfect timing. We're just getting ready. Everyone's gathered at the new enclosure." She led them along a winding path to a large, natural-looking habitat surrounded by viewing areas where a small crowd had assembled, mostly staff, volunteers, and major donors who had supported the sanctuary's establishment. At the center of attention was a large transport crate positioned at the entrance to the enclosure. Lisa Chen, the sanctuary director, approached with a broad smile. "Officer Shepard, we wouldn't dream of doing this without you." She knelt to greet Rex, who had become something of a celebrity among the sanctuary staff. "And you too, of course. Hero Dog." Mike nodded toward the crate. "How are they doing?" "Eager to explore their new home," Lisa replied. "We've kept them together throughout the rehabilitation process. They've formed a tight social bond, despite not being from the same litter." The crowd quieted as Lisa addressed them briefly, explaining the significance of the day's event and thanking those who had made it possible. Mike stood to the side, content to observe rather than participate in the ceremony. "And now," Lisa concluded, "the moment we've all been waiting for. After 6 months of intensive rehabilitation, these tigers will take their first steps into their permanent sanctuary home." At her signal, a staff member carefully opened the transport crate's door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, cautiously, 3 adolescent tigers emerged into the sunlight. The 2 orange tigers came first, their coats glossy and vibrant, bodies strong and healthy, a far cry from the skeletal cubs Mike had found in that suitcase. They moved with the natural grace of their species, alert and curious about their new surroundings. And then, stepping more deliberately behind them, came Hope. Mike's breath caught in his throat. The tiny, dying cub he had cradled in his hands had transformed into a stunning juvenile white tiger. Her blue eyes, now fully open and alert, surveyed the habitat with intelligence and caution. Her once dull coat now gleamed pure white in the sunlight, the black stripes creating dramatic contrast. Though still smaller than her companions, she moved with confidence, showing no signs of the trauma and illness that had nearly claimed her life. Dr. Parker appeared at Mike's side. "Remarkable, isn't it? The most unlikely survivor I've ever treated." Mike nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat as he watched Hope take her first tentative steps onto the grass, then grow bolder, exploring her new territory. Rex sat attentively beside him, ears forward, watching the tigers with what almost seemed like pride. "The latest medical workup shows no lasting damage from her ordeal," Dr. Parker continued. "Her lung function is nearly normal, kidneys fully recovered. She'll always be smaller than average, but otherwise, she's beaten every odd." The crowd applauded as the tigers investigated their habitat, climbing on logs, investigating the pool, and exploring the various environmental enrichments the sanctuary staff had prepared. Hope, after her initial caution, proved to be the most adventurous. Scaling a tall climbing structure to survey her new domain from above. After the formal event concluded and most guests departed, Mike remained at the viewing area, watching Hope. Sarah joined him, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, "the Wildlife Trafficking Task Force is expanding. After Crawford's case, we've received additional funding, new personnel authorizations. We could use someone with your experience and dedication." Mike glanced at her, surprised. "You offering me a job? Agent Reynolds? Officially?" "It would be a special liaison position between Port Authority and the FBI. Unofficially," she smiled, "it would mean continuing what you've started, protecting endangered species from people like Crawford." Mike looked back at Hope, now playfully stalking one of her companions through the tall grass. "I'll think about it." Sarah nodded, understanding that he needed time. "The sanctuary has also asked if you'd consider joining their advisory board. Apparently having the hero who saved Hope associated with their fundraising efforts would be quite valuable." Mike shook his head with a small smile. "I'm no hero. Rex did all the real work." He scratched behind the shepherd's ears affectionately. "Tell that to Hope," Sarah replied gently. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, the sanctuary staff prepared to close for the day. Lisa approached with a key card. "This is for you," she said, handing it to Mike. "VIP access. You're welcome any time, day or night. We consider you family here." Mike accepted the card with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I'd like to visit regularly, if that's all right." "Of course. Hope seems to recognize you. You know." "Watch." Lisa led him to a different viewing area, closer to where Hope was now resting in a patch of sunlight. When Mike approached the glass, the white tiger's head lifted, blue eyes focusing on him with unmistakable recognition. She rose and moved toward the viewing area, stopping just on the other side of the glass from where Mike stood. "Remarkable," Lisa murmured. "She's usually quite reserved with visitors." Mike placed his palm against the glass. After a moment's consideration, Hope pressed her nose to the same spot on the other side, creating an impossible connection across the barrier. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a shared journey, a recognition of survival against impossible odds. Later that evening, Mike drove to a quiet cemetery on Long Island, Rex in the passenger seat beside him. The late spring air was soft with the scent of fresh-cut grass and flowering trees as he made his way to a familiar grave. Emma's headstone was simple white marble, adorned with the small tiger figurines he regularly brought as offerings. Mike knelt before it, placing a framed photograph beside the stone hope in her new habitat, powerful and free. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. "I wanted you to see her, the tiger I told you about. She made it. Against all odds, she fought through," his voice caught. "Just like you fought. And I think maybe she helped me fight too, to find my way back." Rex settled beside him, a warm, solid presence in the gathering dusk. "I miss you every day," Mike continued. "That will never change. But I'm trying to live in a way that would make you proud, to save the tigers you loved so much." A gentle breeze stirred the cemetery trees, sending a shower of white cherry blossoms drifting across Emma's grave. Mike watched them settle on the photograph of hope, a connection across worlds that felt, for a moment, like his daughter's approval. As the sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Mike stood, feeling lighter than he had in 3 years. The hollow ache of grief remained and always would, but alongside it now grew something new: purpose, meaning, even moments of joy. "Come on, Rex," he said. "We've got work to do tomorrow." The shepherd rose obediently, walking beside his handler toward the car. Behind them, in the soft evening light, the photograph of hope seemed to glow with promise, a white tiger rising from darkness into light, leading the way forward. Life has a way of breaking our hearts, doesn't it? We've all experienced that crushing loss that leaves us hollow inside: a spouse gone too soon, a child we couldn't save, a dream that slipped through our fingers. Like Mike Shepherd, we build walls around our grief, thinking isolation will protect us from feeling that pain again. But sometimes, God sends us the most unexpected second chances. A white tiger cub named Hope, fighting against impossible odds, becomes the bridge between despair and healing. This story reminds us that it's never too late to find purpose in our pain. After losing his daughter Emma, Mike thought his heart was permanently broken. Yet through saving Hope, he discovered that brokenness can become an opening for new light to enter. Many of us in our golden years believe our most meaningful days are behind us. This beautiful story challenges that notion. Your greatest contribution might still lie ahead, using your unique experiences, even the painful ones, to make this world better. Like Hope and Mike found each other across impossible circumstances, perhaps your next chapter is waiting to connect with your wounded heart, bringing healing not just to yourself, but to others.